The bullet sped toward with startling suddenness. Rat-a-tat-tat-a-tat went the machine guns as Walter Mitty, proud and defiant, stood ready to receive the onslaught of death.
A group of kids came running down the street, their feet pounding loudly and repetitively against the pavement.
All right, I'm done. See, not more than a minute.
Mrs. Mitty came from around the corner carrying her purse in hand, her high heels making a quick tapping sound as she ran up to Mitty.
Just forgot my compact.
She tittered carelessly.
Now let's go home. I have to take your temperature.
Mitty and his wife began to walk over to the car.
Don't go over 40 this time. You know I hate going over 40.
Mrs. Mitty opened an umbrella to protect herself against oncoming sleet and rain as she walked to the car.
The parachute opened up in the distance as the man who had just jumped out of the helicopter descended to the dark ground below. Private Mitty was sitting with his feet dangling over the hatch and a cigarette in his hand. Flicking it disdainfully overboard, he rose to his feet, just as the pilot yelled over the keening noise, "All right, Mitty, it's a go." Mitty got back down in a sitting position and pushed off and out of the helicopter. With a roaring whoosh, he fell from the hatch toward the earth below as he reached up to pull the strap to activate the parachute. Mitty frantically worked to pull the strap loose. He plummeted further down. The hard ground was coming up fast.
Crash! The car hit a pole as Mitty momentarily lost control of the wheel.
What were you thinking?
Yelled his wife.
You could have killed us.
Mitty waited in the car as his wife went to inspect the damage. The entire front was composed of nothing but bent and misshapen metal.
Are you crazy?
Said Mrs. Mitty.
Maybe you really are sick after all.
Mitty said nothing the entire time, but merely stared off into empty space as the remnants of his adrenaline-filled daydream faded back into reality. Sirens filled the air as ambulances and police cars rushed to the site of the accident.
The loud warning alarm engulfed the still night suddenly, its meaning all too clear. Men, women, and children all rushed wildly below into their bomb shelters as the drone of planes filled the air. Swooping over the city like birds of prey, they unleashed their barrage of destruction. From one building came a sharp cry for help. Mitty stopped in the process of getting into his bomb shelter as he heard the cry in the distance. "There's someone still out there. We have to go back and help."
Are you crazy? It's hell out there if you didn't notice.
"Someone's got to help, and I guess it's going to have to be me. Here, take my grandfather's pocket watch, and don't lose it." And with that matter-of-fact statement, he strode boldly out into the hailstorm of bombing, the sirens continuing unabated in their whining warning tone.
The police cars and ambulances screeched to a halt next to Mitty's car. "We're fine," said Mitty quietly to the cop standing by.
Oh yeah, sure, just fine.
Cried Mrs. Mitty sarcastically.
Only my husband is crazy enough to drive our car into a pole.
"All right, we're going to need to tow this to the garage," said the cop indifferently. He shut his notepad, into which he'd been scribbling a few notes, and picked up Mrs. Mitty's wedding ring.
Wow, you almost made me lose my wedding ring.
Complained Mrs. Mitty. He offered Mitty and his wife a ride to the repair shop, and they got in. Slumped into the seat with dejection, Mitty watched a newspaper flutter by with a caption titled, "The Red Sox Win Game 5."
The pitch curved down low as Mitty checked his swing. "Ball," shouted the umpire. The next pitch was up in the right-hand corner of the strike zone. Mitty took a big swing and felt the jarring contact of ball and bat as the ball soared out further and further across the field, finally disappearing from the stadium altogether. The crowd was going wild as the runners cleared the bases. Followed by the agile whoosh, Mitty himself came round to home plate, and his whole team was ready to celebrate.
Mrs. Mitty shook his shoulder.
The mechanic says we're gonna have to wait overnight, but he says we can get a rental from him.
Mitty rose slowly and walked over to the mechanic to ask for permission to borrow the car. "Take it. I'll have this fixed up by early tomorrow morning." The mechanic quickly handed a few contracts to Mitty.
I'll be taking that. Go to the waiting room.
Exclaimed Mrs. Mitty. He went to the waiting room alone and sat on the couch. As he sat down, he pulled out his pocket watch to check the time. When he unclasped the cover, his eyes were drawn to the red hammer at the center of his watch.
"Just confess," yelled the congressman. "No, I have nothing to confess," Mitty replied calmly. The congressman frothed with rage. "Confess that you are a communist. Confess to the truth. Give me names and I will let you go." I will not confess to a lie. I maintain that I am not a communist. The congressman looked at the other judges on the committee. Then I'm afraid we have no choice but to find you guilty of disloyalty to your country. Mitty stood up straight and proud. He pulled out his pocket watch and looked at the time. To hell with this. I stand by the truth, yelled Mitty, striding composedly toward his doom with an air of heroism. A one last act of defiance in the defense of freedom.